Okay, so welcome to my talk. This is the 4 agreements of incident response. My name is Matty Stratton. I am a DevOps advocate and thought validator at PagerDuty. I don't like the term thought leader, so I decided I'm a thought validator. The things you're thinking, I'm here to tell you, yes, you're correct. That sounds great. So a few things about me. So the first thing is, as I said, I work for a company called PagerDuty. I'm going to tell you a little bit about PagerDuty in a minute. I'm not here to sell you PagerDuty. This is not a talk about PagerDuty, but there's a little bit about how we do things at PagerDuty, so I wanted to give a little bit of background. I've been at PagerDuty for about a year now. Before that, I worked at a company called Chef for almost 5 years, which software, and I especially did a lot of work with Chef with Azure. So I do have some Azure background. It's not completely out of nowhere. I have a podcast that's been going on for about 5 years called Arrested DevOps. We've got some stickers over there. We talk about DevOps related items. One of my fellow podcasters is heavily involved in the Azure space. His name is Trevor Hess. Another one of our hosts is named Bridget Kromhout, who is on the Azure Advocates team, working with Jesse Frizzell and Ashley McNamara and Brian Kettleson. I'm one of the founders of DevOps Days Chicago, so I started that about 5 years ago. I'm one of the global organizers of the DevOps Days conference, and back when I had a car, I just recently moved to San Francisco, so I don't have a car anymore, but when I did have a car, my license plate said DevOps. So, so I do still have the license plate, I just don't have a car to put it on. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about, this is like sort of the fancy, whatever nonsense marketing slide, but tell you a little bit about what PagerDuty does. How many people are familiar with PagerDuty, first of all? Okay, then I don't need to tell you anything about what we do. Fantastic. So since you're familiar with PagerDuty, how many people have ever been in a situation when you're sitting on a phone call with a bunch of other humans, you're trying to solve a problem, and everything's going pear-shaped, and it's just a really miserable experience? How many people have had that experience? How many people think that's awesome and want to do it all the time? So on-call and incident management can be super stressful, but there are ways to make them less stressful, and that's one of the things I'm going to be talking about today. So the first thing is, what exactly is an incident? We talk a lot about incident management, and there was in Mike's talk this morning, he had your little 15 matrix thing, and very nice. I saw that incident response right there in the middle. That's super key. I also wanted to. I don't normally talk about as much about Azure as I'm about to, so that's why I had to pull this thing up. But we did just release. So especially if you're using Azure DevOps, but also there's a lot of PagerDuty integrations into Azure. So when you're getting your events and your alerts and all those things from Azure, you can run them right into PagerDuty. You can also run them into other tools too. I'm not here to sell you a tool. All I'm here to tell you about is don't build your own. That's the only thing I'll tell you. I don't care, use VictorOps, use OpsGenie, use XMatters, use PagerDuty. Just don't try to build your own thing. Y'all are better at building other things that make your company money. So what exactly is an incident? Before we can respond to an incident, right, we have to know what it is. And it sounds silly, but if you don't really know what an incident is for your organization, you don't really know what to do, or you don't know if you should follow your process, right? We don't know how to respond to it. So it's critical that you have a criteria for what an incident means to your organization. And there's no one magic thing that says, this is an incident, because guess what? Everybody in this room, unless you're sitting with some coworkers, has a different type of business that they're in. There's different business outcomes for what your company does. So I'm going to give you an example of what we consider an incident at PagerDuty, just so you can kind of see what one might look like. But the couple things that matter is they need to be relatively simple, because everybody has to understand them. And we don't want to spend a lot of time arguing about whether or not we're having an incident. And then the other thing that's really critical is they need to be tied to a business outcome. So I'll give an example. And I know we're talking about cloud and stuff like that, but how many people have worked on bare metal servers? Really? Shit. Okay. Okay, well, okay, how many people have done IaaS in their career at least? How many people know what a CPU is? Right? Yes, okay, good enough, all right. High CPU utilization is not an incident on a server, right? But being slow to respond, not processing orders, right? If you're saying normally at this time we're selling X amount of shoes and we're selling a lot less shoes than we normally do, that's the kind of thing that might generate an incident. So this is PagerDuty's definition of an incident, right? It's an unplanned disruption of unplanned disruption or degradation of our service. And again, our service is to let you know and wake you up in the middle of the night when stuff's on fire, right? That is actively affecting customers' ability to use the product. So this is kind of a broad definition, right? But it's business related. We're saying it's something that's affecting people's ability to use that. This, you'll have a different definition, but this gives you an idea that can get you started. You want it to be simple, no more than a sentence, and it needs to be easily understood by pretty much everybody inside your organization. This is also a pretty broad definition because like a typo in code could fit this definition. Lots of different things. So this is where you run into sometimes more granularity. So we might talk about different severity levels of incident, or we also talk about sometimes an incident may only be related to one part of our service, or it may require coordination. Not going to get into so much of those details about that, but we can certainly talk more. And one of the things I'd like to do is have conversations either during the break or maybe during the networking about kind of your on-call experiences and how you do incidents where you're at. Now, keeping in mind, you know, like you said, you can have different severities. So for us, we talk about Sev 1, Sev 2, Sev 3, different severity. I don't care if you call them severities, you call them priorities. It could be a little fire emoji or a little smiley emoji or a sad emoji. People might actually do that. I don't know, you know. But what matters is that they're clearly understood within the organization. Now, I'm going to back up a couple little things. So we did a study across over 10,000 companies across 100 different market verticals because we wanted to understand what on-call pain was like. So this was some of the details we saw. So this was, of this study, we had 50,000 incident responders that were received over 760 million notifications. So this is a fairly large sample size of data. And here were some of the things that we found out. So there were 60 million of those notifications took place during dinner hours while people were trying to eat their food with their family. 82 million happened during the evening in general. That's right. Quarter of a billion notifications happened during sleeping hours. 122 million happened on weekends, and that meant we almost had three quarter of a million nights that were interrupted. And that's 330,000 weekend days that were interrupted. So this was a lot. This is what on-call looks like for a lot of people. So we're trying to make it better. But the reason why I'm talking about it here is to understand why it matters to make it better. And here's some of the things that we found out. We also wanted to understand why people left their roles. So we also did a survey across these responders, and we picked out the people who had left their position in the last 18 months. And we asked them a bunch of questions to find out why. Because oftentimes when you think about why does somebody leave a job? Hey, you know, a lot of times they leave because they want more money. They want to do more interesting work. How many people have heard the statement that you don't quit your company, or you don't quit your job, you quit your manager? That's something that happens quite a bit. That's been my career, at least. Fortunately, I have a pretty good manager right now, and he might be watching the live stream, although it's, I think, 1 in in San Francisco, so I think I'm safe. But you know what we found out? These were the most meaningful metrics about attrition. The number of days when a responder's work and life were interrupted. The number of days when they were woken overnight, and the number of weekend days interrupted by notifications. These were the things that made it most influential on whether or not somebody who was a responder to incidents decided to find another job. And to put things, unfortunately, I just realized I didn't do the currency conversion, but I will tell you the dollar conversion, and we can probably dollar amount. In the United States, it costs about $300,000 to replace a software engineer or an IT pro. So regardless of the fact that we should want to have people's life be better, it's also part of the bottom line. So I like this comment here. So again, so why does this matter? So as Charity says, yes, on-call sucks, can destroy your life, we know, bored now, right? It's a fact of life about anybody who's developing high quality software. So how can we make it not suck? Now, if I recall correctly from earlier, most of the folks in this room identify as IT pros, more as ops folks, as opposed to software engineers. Who is, and I'm not going to be picking on anybody, but who identifies more as a software engineer? Okay. How many of you who are software engineers are on call? Okay. That's a whole other conversation. That's a whole other talk. The thing about making on-call suck less for everybody is having everybody be on call. Because I will tell you, here's the thing that sucks if you're not on call. Guess what happens when you're not on call? You're always on call. Because what's the best thing about being on call, if it's done right, is knowing when you're not, right? It's part of a rotation, part of knowing when you're not, because if you're not officially. So that's a thing to bear in mind. So I'm going to use, one of my little ways that I give talks is I find self-help books. I read the description of them a little bit, and I say, well, that sort of sounds a little bit like some stuff I want to talk about. I have a talk called The 5 Love Languages of DevOps, for example. So this is the 4 agreements of incident response. And this is a book, I actually did read this book, by the way. So this one I didn't just read the back cover of. But the book is called The 4 Agreements by Miguel Ruiz. And it's a really good book. It's a great, if you're going to be on a relatively short plane ride, recommend picking it up, not from a tech perspective, but it's a good way to live your life. And the idea is these are these 4 agreements to take in as a way to take on and how you live your life to become a better human, to have a more enjoyable life, to have a more satisfying life. And when I read this book and I started learning about it, I said, you know what, there's some metaphors in here for good practices of incident response and incident management. And so my hope is that by using this metaphor, it will make some of these things a little more memorable and they might stick. I guess we'll find out. By the way, spoiler, this is the first time I'm giving this talk, so it's being piloted to all of you. But I'm giving it at a bunch of other places after this, so we'll see how it goes. But these are what the 4 agreements are. Be impeccable with your word. Don't take anything personally. Don't make assumptions, and always do your best. These things actually sound really straightforward, right? But they're super, super hard. And a couple things to bear in mind. So being impeccable with your word, that doesn't mean just don't tell lies, right? It also has to do with that, words have magic, words have meaning. If you've ever kind of heard the analogies about gossip, right? Once it's out there, you can't get it back. So we talk a little bit about why it's important to think about what we're saying and why we're saying it. Don't take anything personally. This is the agreement that I have absolutely the hardest time in the world with. I'm still struggling with. We always hear about not making assumptions because the thing is we all have different metaphors and different lenses by which we view the world than other people do. And always do your best makes me think about the things I talk to my kids about. I have twin boys who are almost 9 and I have a daughter who's 7. And so I always tell them to always do their best. I tell them to always do their best. I don't always do my best, but I'm doing my best for you right now. I guarantee that this is one thing that is happening. So what I'm hoping to is that this will help us understand these modern approaches to incident response, make things as effective as possible, and help reduce burnout. So if we think first, we think about being impeccable with your word. So what are some of the items that when I come in and I think about good practices of incident response that have to do with being impeccable with your word, with being clear? To me, this is the things that are about being clear, being direct, and being concise. So one thing that's really critical for us is that I think, we have a lot of automation. Automation is a big deal, especially in DevOps, especially in the world of IT we live in today. And it's not uncommon. In fact, it's a good practice to have your incident response process get kicked off by automation. I just said that, right? You can have events that occur within Azure kick off an incident inside PagerDuty. But we don't want it to only be that way. So we believe strongly that at PagerDuty that anybody can kick off our incident response process at any time. And for example, we have it where we've got it set up in a little Slack chatbot. So if you say IC page, it goes ahead and kicks off, gets our incident commanders on board and does all these things. We believe strongly that even if someone on the cleaning staff is walking past a display that shows something's looking pear-shaped on a monitor, they should be able to pull that cord and kick off the incident response process. And here's why. Because let's say you start your incident response process and it turns out that you weren't actually having an incident. What's the worst thing that happened out of all of that? You got a chance to practice doing incident response. Now, some of you might have been thinking, well, the worst thing that's going to happen is now it went up on the CIO's dashboard that said we had a sub 1 incident, and that's how we're measured about whether or not we do a good job. That's a bad, bad metric. So that's the thing now. How many people in here are setting the metrics for their entire IT department across at the C-level executive level? So unfortunately, we can't always make those changes, but those are the things that I talk about when I talk to CIOs and CTOs about thinking about the way we measure, because the trick is humans will work to the metrics you tell us you're going to measure us to. And we're going to talk about that in a second. But the point is, it's important that anybody should be able to kick off incident response at any time. So we also talk about don't litigate severity during a call. And what does that mean? That means let's not argue about it. So we talked about having different severities, having a Sev 1, a Sev 2, a Sev 3, and we used to do this at page, they're supposed to be blank. Sorry, okay. I believe strongly that you can either listen or you can read. So I do a lot of black slides, but that's also why I put the Twitter up on there. Feedback on that is welcome at some point, if that's too confusing. So we used to do this at PagerDuty a lot. We would get on a call and say, is this really a Sev 1, or is this a Sev 2, or is this a Sev 3? And you know what happens by the time we're done arguing about it? It's become a high severity incident. We haven't actually accomplished anything. We've just sat there and said like, oh, we argued about it. So we always assume the highest severity because again, what's the worst thing that happened? We practiced our Sev 1 process. If we were getting measured about saying if you have X amount of severity and this is going to impact your bonus or your pay or your review, that's a different kind of a problem. But what will happen almost every time if you start litigating severity during a call is that you're going to spend all your time arguing. And I call that mean time to innocence. It's not a good metric to have. Also, you want to make sure you're notifying your stakeholders. And this is again being impeccable with right, sending the information. The more that you let stakeholders know about what's going on, number one, the more they'll stay out of your way. And they can also help move that communication chain along, right? Because stakeholders have stakeholders. If you're involved, the thing is, if we're involved in restoring service, we don't want to be sitting and trying to think about everybody who has to know everything. So we need to have some common way that we can provide status on what's going on, whether it's some kind of a status page, through a Slack room, which is what we do, for example, at PagerDuty, is we have one main Slack room where we're doing all the work and communicating amongst ourselves during an incident, and we also have the conference bridge, but then there's a separate Slack channel, which is more for the updates. So that's where if the executives want to know, the stakeholders know, they have a place to go to see kind of, again, those, what they would call, that's why they call them executive summaries, I guess, right? And a lot of times you want to have someone, if you have the ability and the staffing to do this, have someone in a role that's either a customer liaison or an internal liaison whose job during the incident is to provide that status. Because the people who are solving the problem should be working on solving the problem, not updating stakeholders. But as an organization, you want to make sure your stakeholders are updated. So these are, again, to sort of recap on the things that are about being impeccable with your word, the practices. Remember, anyone can trigger incident response. Don't litigate severity. Notify your stakeholders, and that's it. Sorry, I thought there was a fourth one on there. So now the next one is don't take anything personally. Again, as you may recall, this was the one that I have a hard time with. I don't have as hard of a time during incident management, incident response. I have more of a hard time with it in my personal life, taking things personally. But that being said, feedback is welcome on my talk. I won't take it personally, probably. So going into that, and this is why it becomes, what I'm about to show you is something that is why it becomes really hard to not take things personally during an incident. So at some point, when things are going squirrely, we have to make a mental shift between peacetime and wartime, right? Which is we are going back from normal operations to now we are literally defending our business, right? We are taking some kind of an outage, we have some kind of an incident, and for a lot of organizations, these incidents can cost hundreds of millions of euro an hour or more, right? So we have to move quickly. And for this to happen, it's a mental shift that is happening. So a couple things happen when we go from one to the other. One is our tolerance for risk actually goes up. We are more likely to take risks during wartime. And if you don't like the military metaphors, we could say like, normal and emergency. I prefer this myself. But during emergency, and that's not a bad thing that our tolerance for risk goes up, because what we're trying to do is restore service, and then we can get back to normal operations. Our need for consensus goes down. We don't have to make sure everybody feels super good about it and we're all got nice warm hugs and everything like that. We communicate much more directly, and that's where the don't take it personally comes in. Does this mean that during an incident it's okay for people to be jerks to each other? No. We still treat each other as good humans, but we tend to be more direct. And when I talk a little bit about what the role of an incident commander is, those are things that we would probably not tolerate during product development or during just normal day-to-day operations. You could also just call this okay and not okay. But we're talking about making this mental shift. Now, we base a lot of the way we do incident management on some structured stuff. We didn't really create it, but these are all internationally different ways that they've done. And usually it's where these have come from is first responders, whether they're firefighters or emergency responders. And where, for example, the National Incident Management System is the one that is used in the United States. And where this came from was in the 1970s, there was a string of really devastating wildfires in Southern California, which is actually kind of happening now. But the problem was there were hundreds of thousands of firefighters from all over the country came to try to help fight these fires. And they had a real hard time with it. And the problem wasn't that they weren't good firefighters, but every fire department had a different way of working. So they were all good at fighting fires, but they weren't good at working together. So that's where the National Incident Management System came from. And then again, you can see in different countries, there's different ones that are similar. The UK system is kind of cool because they have a role called the Gold Commander, which kind of sounds like a James Bond villain. So I kind of dig that. So there's a couple, and I'm going to put a couple of resources. I will put at the end of this, there's a link that will be a link to the deck and and then we'll also include links to some background resources and things like this as well. So when we kind of follow these processes, one of the things that's true about almost all of these, whether it's called the Gold Commander, if you want to be evil, or cool, or awesome, or oftentimes we call the Incident Commander. And the Incident Commander is a very important role that's happening during coordinated incident response. The Incident Commander is a person who is in charge during the incident. They're the big boss, whether or not that's their normal job. In fact, it normally isn't. But what's important is an Incident Commander is not someone who is trying to solve problems. They're not a resolver. They're there to coordinate and to delegate. So we sit there and we have the incident commander up on top, and then you have your subject matter. The only thing you need to get started from the roles perspective is you need an incident commander and you need your subject matter experts. And your subject matter experts are the people who just know how to do the work. They're the people who are the experts in the services and the systems that are taking the incident right now. The trick about the incident commander that can be really hard, and this is where it starts to become hard on the don't take it personally, is no matter what their day-to-day role, the incident commander is in charge and is the one who is actually making all the decisions. Again, I cannot stress enough, they are not resolving the incident. In the United States, in the National Incident Management System, the way firefighters use it is the incident commander wears a white helmet, and they have a saying which says if you see someone with a white helmet holding a wrench, take the wrench away from them and hit them over the head with it. Because they're not supposed to be trying to fix things. Now, what can happen during ours, now first of all, don't hit your colleagues over the head with wrenches because we don't usually wear helmets. But sometimes the person who is the incident commander who was on call might actually be the right person to solve the incident. And then what do you think you do when that happens? Change the incident commander, just swap them, because you never, as I always like to say, my hero Ron Swanson would say, never half-ass 2 jobs, whole-ass 1 job. So that joke doesn't always go over so well. So now, remember, the incident commander is in charge. They're the highest authority on the call, higher even than the CEO. This is tricky. My advice to you is make sure that your management knows about this before it happens, or things will not go well for you. You do not want to surprise senior management with this idea during an incident. This happened at PagerDuty. We have now our CEO has been with the company for a couple of years, but she had just joined, and it was about maybe 3 weeks into her tenure, and got on a call and was basically kicked off the call by a junior engineer, and who I have nothing but respect for that engineer for being able to do that. And Jen was pretty fuming and pissed off and everything at first, and then there was follow-up and explanation of this is how we do incident management at PagerDuty, and more importantly, this is why. I'm going to talk about that in a second. But the way you have to make sure that people understand there's a reason we work this way, and it can be tricky, especially for executives. Things like I just talked about with when our CEO jumped on the call is a type of behavior that we sometimes call the executive swoop. Because it's sort of an executive sort of swoops in and they want to take charge. So sometimes you get things like this, right? You get don't listen to the incident commander, just start doing what I say. Have you tried doing this? Why isn't someone doing this? Why aren't you doing that? And there's one magical phrase. So if you are the incident commander and an executive or someone of that nature gets on the call and does that, then the only phrase you need to memorize is, are you taking command? You just simply say that. You just say, are you taking command? And one of two things is going to happen. Either they're going to say yes, and then you say, fantastic, I am off the hook, it's all yours. Or more often than not, they say nothing. They just sort of back away and they move along, because that helps them understand that there's a lot of incident management is more about psychology than it is about technical prowess. Another one, too, that you get is, I want this resolved in 10 minutes. How many people have been on a call like that where executive gets in and says, this better be fixed in an hour, or this better be fixed in 15 minutes? This is so demoralizing to hear, because what it's implying is you're not working as hard as you could. So thank God we've got this CIO who came in here to motivate us and get us to go faster. Yes, is not effective. And then the comment for this one is simply to say, we are in the middle of resolving an incident, please save your comments for the end. And because the thing to remember, don't take it personally. And why does that matter? People who do this are not doing it to be jerks. They are concerned. This is their business, right? They are worried about what's happening. They think they're helping. So we need to do the things that just keep things focused. So being strong in our statements help. This is why, by the way, people who are very good at incident commanders, great incident commanders are usually people who have a role of being a product owner or a project manager. Engineers are not always great incident commanders because we don't always have the non-technical skills that make us great at it, and we also usually want to try to fix the problem. But product owners, and Google does this as well. I learned this from reading their book and found out we do the same thing at PagerDuty, and it makes a lot of sense. If you have product owners doing it, they have those, I hate to say soft skills, but they have those non-technical skills about delegating and communicating that make them great incident commanders. They have an understanding of the system, but not enough they're going to try to troubleshoot it. And this is the selfish part. Now the product owner has visibility into your outages and your incidents because they sat on the call too. So now all those little technical stories where you're like, we want to fix this stuff, they were there. So this works exceptionally well. One of my colleagues who just joined our evangelism team, who had been a product person at PagerDuty for years, she was the first non-engineer incident commander at PagerDuty, and now we have 22 incident commanders. None of them are engineers, because we want the engineers to be subject matter experts, not incident commanders. So when we think about the not taking anything personally, to review, we're going to make that switch in our mindset. The incident commander is the highest authority. The incident commander is not a resolver. And remembering ways to deal with executive swoop. So the third agreement is don't make assumptions. And I like this one, which is we have to begin with certain assumptions. We'll assume that I'm right and you're wrong. There's also the well-known, this is a little more of a joke in the English word, but I mean, how many people have heard the thing, never make assumptions because they make an ass out of you and me. But I like this cartoon better, which is, let's assume I'm right, you're wrong. So we want to avoid making assumptions. And this is why. I propose that this background is blue. Who agrees with me? Do you agree? Is it blue? Is it blue? I don't know. Is the background blue? Is it blue? Is it blue? Okay, that could take forever, right? This getting distributed consensus takes a long time. Let's try this another way. I propose this background is blue. Is there any strong objection? Cool, background's blue, let's move on. So, and I had one objection, but there was one. I'm optimizing for the 99%. So, which is okay during an incident, right? So that phrase is really important. So you notice I said, is there any strong objection? And the word strong is key, because that's making sure that I'm saying, you better be able to back it up. And I'm not saying I'm going to challenge you. I mean, you may have a strong objection, and it's valid, and you should be able to voice it, but we're not looking for the most optimized situation. The reason we want to do this as well, instead of just the reason that we still have to get some kind of consensus, this avoids hindsight effect. This avoids, Mike coming up later and saying, well, I told you that wasn't going to work. If you'd only, or not, I didn't tell you, if you'd only asked me, I could have told you that wouldn't work, or I could have told you we would have had that problem. So this does give the opportunity to raise objections. But we're getting consensus by asking for positive. I remember when I was in the Boy Scouts and we would go backpacking in the mountains, you never would say, is everybody ready? You say, is anybody not ready? You're looking for those objections rather than the agreement, because the objections imply the agreement. So the other thing too is avoid jargon, right? Avoid very complicated technical terms and acronyms, because this one, I'll just read this because I thought this one was appropriate. It said, I proofread your technical document, even though I didn't understand any of it. So I couldn't tell what the acronyms from the typo, so I changed it to what felt right. And the boss says, so you say we should migrate our lemon flutes to a hard flea? And he goes, well, not all at once. So the problem with when we put in jargon and we say things, let's get all the ICs on the RC and get some BLTs for all the SMEs. So first of all, there's cognitive overhead. I have to now sit there and say, what do all those terms mean, right? Or if there may be new people to the organization who don't know all of our terms. So we want, and that can make them feel excluded. They can, we don't want to have to over-explain things, but we want to be clear rather than concise. This isn't about writing like great code at this point, right? We're saying let's be clear rather than concise. So we need to assign some tasks to our subject matter experts. Now we're an incident commander. We need to resolve our incident. So we've got some ideas. We've collected some ideas from the subject matter experts. We've got some things we want to try. We need to now assign these tasks. So how are we going to go about doing that in a way where we're not making assumptions? And it looks a little something like this. The incident commander would say, Rachel, I'd like you to investigate the increased latency. I'm going to come back to you in 5 minutes. Understood? And Rachel will say, understood. So a couple things happen in here that are key. As the incident commander, I'm clear about what I'm asking. I'm giving it a time box, and I'm making sure that it's been acknowledged. You always want to avoid the deadly phrase, which is, can someone? A lot of times when I give my incident management talk, I start at the beginning and I say, hey, can someone keep track of time for me? And then about half an hour in, I'll say, so who is keeping track of time? And almost nobody will have done it. That's called the bystander effect. So you always want to make sure that you assign tasks to an individual. Now they can be assigned to a role. You could say, okay, I need the on-call DBA to go check the shipping logs, but you're not saying I need someone to go check those logs. And you're giving it a time box. Now let's say Rachel comes back to me after 5 minutes, or I come back to her after 5 minutes and she says, I need more time. I'm not necessarily going to say, okay, I'm going to check back with you in another 5 minutes. Then I will say, how much more time do you need? But it's still time boxed. So the key part of this is that, and this understood is so critical, because otherwise I could come back in 5 minutes and she'd be like, oh, I wasn't sure you meant that I was supposed to do that, or I wasn't sure about what you meant. This gives her the opportunity to be clear about what I'm asking. So when we think about not making assumptions, the pieces of that are to remember consensus is hard, right? Distributed consensus is hard. Think about things like Kafka and all sorts of other distributed systems. They're challenging. That's even worse when it's humans, right? Clear is better than concise. You want to assign tasks to one specific person, and you want to time box those tasks. So finally, the last agreement is to always do your best. Be like Daniel-san. He's the best around. You're the best around. So this is a controversial statement I'm about to make, and it's going to make some of you very uncomfortable. The wrong decision is better than no decision at all. Again, rules are different during incident response. And the reason why the wrong decision is better than no decision is because the wrong decision provides you with information. No decision provides you with no information. If we make the wrong decision, we can see that something happened, we can come back, see that that didn't work, and move on to our next thing. Otherwise, we run into something called analysis paralysis, where we sit there and we try to think of every single thing that could happen. In the meantime, our company is bleeding money. So this is, again, is challenging. Now, that doesn't mean that crazy decisions are better. It doesn't mean just go do whatever we want. But if we try to think, again, it's back to getting that distributed consensus. If we say we want to make sure that we've got the exact right thing before we move, we will never move. So this one, I believe this is a concept. The reason it says rally cars is I call this rally fast, disband faster. And what that means is get all the right people that you need when you need them, but don't leave them on the call. Don't keep them around any longer than you need to. How many people have ever, this usually happens in large enterprises, but have sat on a incident call with 100 other people? Yeah. And of that time, how much of that time were you actually doing anything most of the time? Almost zero, right? Oh, sorry, here, you want to take a picture? There you go. Okay. So the problem is, this is very common to say, well, let's get everybody who might have some insight into what's going on, let's get them on the bridge, and we're going to sit there for hours. And so you could have 100, 200 people that all cost €100 an hour, and you're sitting there, you're just burning cash. And not only are you burning cash, it's probably happening in the middle of the night. These people are having quality of life issues. They're certainly not going to be effective tomorrow. So what is okay, and this is where the disband faster comes in, is I might sit there and say, you know what? I think this is a network problem. I don't think we need the app folks anymore. Go ahead, go back, keep your phone on. We will call you if we need you. Because as a responder, I would much rather be told I can leave and you'll call me if you need me than sit around and wait. Because it's stressful for the person sitting around doing nothing because they're frustrated. It's really stressful for the people that are actually trying to solve the problem because they know that there's tons of people sitting there getting irritated that they're not moving any faster, they're not getting anything done. So you want to rally, disband faster. And so do responders get tired? What about incident commanders, right? Incidents can go on pretty long. So you want to be able to swap people in and out. And the good news is this is relatively easy to do. Provided that you don't have complete single point of failure in an organization, which is a whole other conversation. But at least for incident commanders, and whoever your subject matter experts are, when you know you're getting to the point that people are starting to get tired, and usually we find that it's about 6 hours, between 4 to 6 hours is a time when you really should be bringing in somebody fresh. And what you do is you have whoever is the backup, have them join the call about 15 minutes before you want to swap. So they can be shadowing, have maybe the backup incident commander talking in a private chat room with the incident commander to get brought up to speed. And then all you have to do is just say a very magic word, which just says, I'm Matty, I'm the incident commander. I am passing off command to Rick. And Rick says, hey, I'm Rick. I am now the incident commander. And now everybody knows what's going on. So it's very clear. And then all hell breaks loose because Rick is the incident commander. So. See, I know how to play this game too. So I'm going to talk a little bit about postmortems or after incident reviews or learning reviews or whatever you want to call them. I know a lot of people don't like to call them postmortems because it's not like your system actually died, but it's sort of like the term DevOps engineer. I've made my peace with it, and whatever is the thing that makes you do them, then they make me happy, right? So there's a couple things to keep in mind, and this again is about doing your best and about doing improvement, because that's what after incident reviews are for. They're for improving. So a couple little tips about this, because we could go and talk for this itself is a whole other 2-hour conversation. So I'd love to talk about after incident reviews at some point. So they should be what we would call blameless. And now blameless is a tricky word because sometimes people think blameless means no accountability. That's absolutely not true. If you screw something up, you're still accountable. You're accountable for making things better. But a blameful postmortem is one that says, hey, Matty messed up. Who cares? How does that help the system become more resilient? So, okay, so I went in and I did RMRF on slash. Okay, but why was I able to do that in the first place, right? What's wrong with our system that's allowing these fallible humans because we're gonna make mistakes. Human error is never a root cause. Nothing is a root cause. That's a whole other conversation we could talk about. There are multiple causes. But you want your postmortems to be blameless, which means because that's what lets people be safe. Because here's the thing. The reality, again, people will work to the incentives you give them. So if people are afraid that if they make a mistake, they are going to be punished, does that make them make fewer mistakes, to be quite honest? No. Makes them become subject matter experts in hiding their mistakes. And when that happens, you are well and truly screwed because you don't know what's happening in production anymore. The other thing about after incident reports is you need to avoid having what I would call a write-only postmortem, which is when people will say, oh, well, our process says after we have an incident, I write up the postmortem and it goes in our wiki and then we're done. Okay, the whole point of them is so that we can learn from them. And it doesn't necessarily mean that we're just getting action items out of them, but how are we sharing with the business, with our colleagues, with other teams about the things that we learned from this process? And then also make sure that you're continually reviewing your incident process because those things change constantly as well. PagerDuty, just for context, we're about 500 people right now, but there was a time when there was if there was any kind of an outage or an incident of any kind of PagerDuty, everybody in the whole company got paged. Well, that worked fine when there was like 40 people. It would super suck right now. So, as you're continually changing, so whether it's once a quarter, once a year, continually be reviewing your incident response process. And, again, always looking for continuous improvement. This is a key concept when we look at kind of modern technology, modern IT operations, whether we call it DevOps, or whether we call it just doing work. We are continually looking at how we can improve the way that we're doing things. And finally, don't panic, right? Now, here's the thing. It's because being on call and an incident is very panic-inducing. How many people, maybe you're sitting on the metro or sitting on the train and somebody's cell phone is set to the exact same tone as your pager alert for on-call, and you get that jumping feeling, right? So when you hear that tone, that means you're having an outage. We have a response. It's okay to panic on the inside, but don't panic on the outside because you need to keep all the responders and everybody else you're working with because panic is contagious. So when we were at PagerDuty, when we were kind of developing a lot of these processes, some of the folks who came over, they trained with firefighters, not with fighting fires, but just sort of going through learning incident process from them. And they told a story and they said, it happens often. There's a fire, they go to respond to this fire, and of course the homeowner is panicking and freaking out because why wouldn't you? Your house is burning down. And the firefighters, they say, what we say to them, we say, hey, this may be your first fire, but it is not ours. This is not our first fire. So keep that in mind, right? Incidents are things that happen. We want to keep calm. You're going to have stakeholders that are panicking. Keep calm. Don't knock over your Coke Zero. Right? Calm people stay alive. So to kind of recap there, for always doing your best, the things to keep in mind, right? So it's better to make the wrong decision than to make no decision. You want to rally fast and disband faster. Handovers are encouraged. Make sure your postmortems, I like to say, they're useful. You're not doing them just to fill out a form. And you'd be surprised. And always review your process. And don't panic. So, what questions can I answer for you? Yeah.
Cases when the
Well, then make the next decision. It can happen. It can happen. Because the thing is, you're never going to know that you're making the right decision until after you've made the decision. And depending on how badly you made it, that's part of your postmortem, right? So let's say your decision that you made was, well, let's just drop all the tables in the database. How did that happen? Right? So part of that is, again, it's a little glib to sort of be like, oh, well, just make any decision is fine. Remember, it's not make any decision. But the point of that is to not be so concerned about making sure that you've thought through every single possible thing that could happen, because we need to get service restored. But to answer this specifically, when the wrong decision makes things worse, that's what your postmortem is for. To figure out, what did we learn? What did we learn so we can do this better next time? Okay. So if you would like, so this is, I'm very excited I have a QR code. I didn't know anybody used them. You also, if you go to mattstratton.com/speaking, this presentation is up there along with the links to back things up. One of the things that I have a link to, so we at PagerDuty have open sourced our response process, the way that we do incident response. That's at response.pagerduty.com, but I have links to that. I have links to the survey and the study that we did around on-call. I have links to the Don Manuel Ruiz book as well. And you can also see other talks and decks and things I've done over there. Okay, and you can find me on Twitter. I'm at Matt Stratton. My podcast is arresteddevops.com. I would love to hear about your on-call stories, either during breaks or during the networking event. Kind of any questions, any follow-ups you have. But thank you for your time, and it's really enjoyed being here.